Which one is the best and which ones are the worst weapons in Monster Hunter now? Well, in this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts and opinions on each weapon, and of course, we'll be ranking them together in a tier list. Now for this list, I'll only be needing 3 tiers. S tier is for weapons that are the best of the best. The A tier is for solid weapons. Nothing wrong with these weapons, but some weapons are just better. Lastly, the B tier is for weapons that are not the best for Monster Hunter Now's gameplay mechanics. By the end of this video, you might just think to yourself that Niantic might be favoring one weapon over the others. First, let's talk about the ranged weapons. For me, these weapons instantly rank high in the tier list, simply because when using ranged weapons, you tend to get hit less. You can easily dodge monster attacks since you can see them coming from a mile away. And in Monster Hunter Now, the less you get hit, the better, since HP is the most valuable resource. Which is why the bow is the #1 weapon in this tier list. Not only is it the safest weapon you can use, it also outputs consistently high damage. Because in this game, you don't have to worry about any stamina gauge, and you can just mindlessly charge and dodge whenever you need to. Even though the critical distance for ranged weapons got nerfed, as long as you pay attention to your distance from the monster and not go too far, the bow will still output a lot of damage. For builds, you only need to worry about 2 skills, and that's focus and elemental damage. The builds for bows are very flexible since you have a ton of options. You can easily mix and match different armor skills to either maximize focus or elemental damage. You can even mix in bursts for raw damage. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but every new monster subspecies that gets added to the game has an armor piece that has the focus skill. If you're still not convinced that the bow is the best weapon in this game, well, currently it's the only weapon that has access to the dragon element, an element that flying wyverns are weak against. That's Rathians and Rathalos, a very important monster that you should farm. It's only during the Lunar New Year event happening in Feb that 2 other weapons are getting access to dragon elemental weapons. Come on, Niantic, you don't have to be so obvious about which weapons are your favorites. Give us more dragon elemental weapons. The other ranged weapon is the light bowgun. Now, this might be a controversial hot take, but I think it's an A tier weapon. Now, I conducted a poll on this channel's community tab where I asked you guys which weapons you think are the best and which ones you think are the worst. And I was surprised to see that the light bowgun was the second weapon to get the most votes as the worst weapon. For me, the light bowgun sits at the edge of the A tier simply because it's a ranged weapon. Now, is it better than the bow? No, of course not. But it's still a safer playstyle when you compare it to the other melee weapons. But I can see where you guys are coming from. The light bowgun certainly has a lot of limitations and issues. For one, you need 2 quality of life skills, and that's reload speed and recoil down. And when you add these 2 skills into your build, you won't have any more space or the flexibility to add more offensive skills. Plus, you have no control over the ammo type you will use, and that's the biggest downside of this weapon. The light bowgun's damage also got nerfed when hitting non-monster weak spots, so its damage potential is lower, but it can still save you more potions than the other weapons in this list. So for me, it's still an A tier weapon. Now onto melee weapons. First up is the longsword. It's S tier. The devs said it themselves. It's one of the most powerful weapons. They said it here in the patch notes. The Helmbreaker's damage is too good, and the EI/counter also deals a lot of damage. So if you can pull off these 2 moves consistently, then the monster will be deleted. Builds for the longsword can focus purely on offensive skills that maximize elemental damage and affinity, and you don't have to worry about adding any quality of life skills. So for me, the longsword is S tier, which is why I was so shocked to see that not a lot of you weebs voted for longsword as the best weapon in the polls. The bow had the most votes, and the second one was the sword and shield. Now I'm glad to see that a lot of players think that the sword and shield is one of the best weapons. The sword and shield certainly goes into S tier. Overall, it's a solid weapon and you cannot go wrong with this weapon. It does lack some DPS and it's not as flashy as the bow or the longsword, but what pushes it to S tier is its versatility. The sword and shield can do everything. It has access to both elemental weapons and status weapons. Because of its fast attacks, it's the best weapon for applying status effects. It has a shield that can block attacks in a pinch and can be used easily to block roars. The shield can also be used as a weapon to deal blunt attacks that can KO monsters even without the slugger skill. The sword and shield is also a relatively safer weapon to use. It doesn't lock you into animations and you can easily dodge away whenever you want to. As a sword and shield main, I'm pretty happy with the performance of this weapon. Next is the dual blades. Now, the closest thing we can compare it to is the sword and shield. They're both light weapons and have fast attacks. The dual blades is faster and more stylish, but personally, I think the dual blades rank lower than the sword and shield, putting it into A tier. It has great DPS, but it lacks the versatility of the sword and shield. The dual blades currently does not have any status weapons in its arsenal. Another downside is you have to manage a stamina gauge when using the dual blades, unlike the other weapons in this game. Because of this added limitation, you also cannot use your special skill outside of demon mode. And if you're like me, I sometimes use the special skill as a get out of jail free card and avoid damage in a pinch. The dual blades can't do that without first activating demon mode. And if you don't have any stamina, then you can't activate your special skill. High risk and high reward is the name of the game, which is why the dual blades sits at A tier. On to the heavy weapons. These last three weapons rank the lowest on the tier list, simply because heavy weapons are prone to taking damage. That's why they're in B tier. The hammer feels very heavy and clunky to use, because unlike the regular Monster Hunter titles, in this game you cannot make micro adjustments to your positioning. But playing the hammer requires precise positioning if you want to consistently hit the monster's head and KO monsters, which the hammer should excel in. In Monster Hunter now, I found it very difficult to position myself properly since the only movement option in this game is dodge rolling, and you lose your charge every time you dodge. So unless you perfect dodge everything, your charge levels will always reset whenever you dodge and you have to charge all over again. These charge attacks are also very risky as it leaves you very vulnerable after every attack, and more mistakes could be made this way. Moving on to the Greatsword. Now this weapon deals huge damage numbers as intended, but to get to that juicy big hit, you have to charge for a very long time. Misjudge the timing and you will get hit. Fail to stagger the monster with your attack and you will get hit. Now charging is such a high commitment, and to make it safer, you can perform a guard tackle. But in doing so, you will take a lot of chip damage. Plus, if you mess up, you will get hit. Not only that, the new monster subspecies that get added to the game, like Black Diablos and Azure Rathalos, move around so much that you don't really get the opportunity to charge your attacks for that juicy big hit. The Greatsword is so much riskier to use than the other weapons in this list, which is why it is in B tier. But it can still perform a dodge roll unlike the last weapon in this list. The lance, in my opinion, is the worst weapon in Monster Hunter now, all because guard sucks. The shield is the best defensive option of the lance, since you can't dodge roll using this weapon, but when you block attacks, you still take chip damage. The other heavy weapons like the hammer and the greatsword still have the chance to end hunts without taking any damage at all, while the lance requires you to play perfectly and perfect guard all the attacks if you don't want to take any chip damage. But there's a lot of factors that can affect one's ability to play perfectly, like unstable internet connection, your phone might be lagging, or the sun might be too bright and you can't see anything on your screen. Plus, we're playing outdoors, so we still have to focus on our surroundings. So you're not 100% focused on the game, and you will end most hunts taking a lot of chip damage. Not only that, personally, I think the lance needs a damage buff. When you get a counter using the long sword, you will get rewarded with huge damage. With the lance, not so much. Perfect guarding even requires you to have the offensive guard skill in your builds to get some sort of damage buff. But for perfect dodging, you get the damage buff for free. Crazy, right? Now, the armor set you need to build for the lance requires guard skills, because without it, you will run out of potions very quickly. The other quality of life skills like focus, reload speed, and recoil down improves the weapon's DPS, while guard is purely a defensive skill that doesn't offer any improvements to damage at all. So the lance gets dragged down to the bottom of the list because its ability to block attacks is not properly balanced, and personally I think its damage needs a bit of tweaking. Offensive guard should reward players with more damage. So I might be trashing on the lance right now, but it's actually one of my favorite weapons, which is why I want to see it become a viable weapon in Monster Hunter now. But until then, I'll be sticking with my sword and shield. Now I just want to stress out that these are just my opinions, and if you don't agree with this list, that's okay, and you can share your thoughts in the comment section below. But if you still want to main the lance, be sure to check out this video right here where I give you 5 tips to help you master the lance. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!